Hey, what's good, everybody? Welcome in. It's the Quant Edge Video Series presented by FantasySportsMarkets.com. He, of course, is Derek Brown. I am Ben Heisler. Week 1 is officially here, and that means we have DFS matchups to go through. And Derek, when was the last time you played a little game of Would You Rather?
Not counting right before we turned the mics on. Man, it was like probably February.
Okay.
So let's go, man. It's
All
week
right.
one time, baby.
So let's start at the quarterback spot. We're going to go through guys that I think have a chance to be some contrarian plays over at Fantasy Sports Markets, but also maybe in that realm of, really intriguing quality plays. And these are all guys that we like for this week. But you got to try and figure out who you like a little bit more, who would you rather play when it comes to your DFS roster. So let's start at the quarterback spot. Cam Newton at home against the Rams in a game that has a lot of projections for a shootout, or Baker Mayfield making his home debut for 2019 against Tennessee. Who would you rather go with at quarterback this week?
Benny, for me right now, and I know I've spent a lot of love for Baker Mayfield, but I've got to go with Cam on this one. I think that the Titans defense actually sets up pretty nicely against the Browns right now. You look at the Titans, they allowed the 5th fewest points to fantasy quarterbacks last year. And then you look at this matchup. You talked about the total. The Rams and the Panthers had the second highest team total on the main slate. And if you look at how the Panthers can attack the Rams defense, this is a team that was 39th percentile in passing yards allowed at 254 and 25th percentile if you head over to the Quant Edge and look at the head-to-head comparison tool in passing touchdowns allowed per game. So I like Cam a lot, even if he doesn't run in this game, because the Rams are good against running quarterbacks. Even if he doesn't run, I still like Cam versus Baker in this one.
Yeah, and there's plenty of options for Cam to be able to spread the ball out to. There's a lot of options for him. As for Baker, there might be a wide receiver a little bit later on in the week if you followed this video series that Derek is very, very high on as a possible sleeper candidate for week 1. Let's move on to running back. We all know that Dalvin Cook is going to be the chalk running back of the week. It doesn't matter whether you're on the salary sites, whether you're on FSM. But some other chalky running backs that I think you could differentiate a little bit, and they both have outstanding matchups. So who would you rather play, Derek? Kerryon Johnson on the road at Arizona and that awful defense, or Chris Carson as a big home favorite against the Cincinnati Bengals?
I'm going with the home guy. I'm going with Chris Carson in this one. And this just comes down to, if you're looking at bad defensive matchups, the Bengals are the worst. They're terrible versus running backs. You look at last year, they gave up 114 rushing yards per game. They gave up almost a full rushing touchdown per game. Both of those were 37th percentile or worse in the NFL. I think Carson is going to be fed. I think he gets more run in the passing game. If he is the chalk this week, like we're talking about, this is the type of chalk that you eat and you just love the entire time.
I think that's perfectly fair. I'm going to have interest and I'm going to have options in both those guys throughout the week. I will say this, though. There's going to be a lot of people on Carson and not enough people on Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett. They're going to score some points in that game you can throw on Cincinnati as well. So I'm certainly intrigued if you want to pivot off of Carson there. A little Wilson to Tyler Lockett stack is certainly intriguing. Wide receiver. Again, we talked about Dalvin Cook, but the wide receivers for Minnesota against Atlanta are going to be in play as well. But it's a question of which one you'd rather go with. So, Adam Thielen versus Atlanta or Stephon Diggs against Atlanta? Where are you going this week?
So I think both are good plays in this game, but if I've got to pick one, it's got to be Adam Thielen. I think that Kirk Cousins showed this preseason in a very small sample that if you're looking to find out who the number one wide receiver in Minnesota, it is Adam Thielen. Last year's beginning was not an apparition. I think they are still going to throw this year. You look at the preseason, again, small sample. Cousins targeted Thielen on 33% of his passes. And I understand Brian Pula is gone, so the absolute just revolving door in the slot for the Falcons. But they still, last year, as a team, gave up the second most receiving touchdowns to wide receivers and the fourth most DK points to wide receiver position last year. So I love Adam Thielen this week.
I agree with you. I think Thielen is the play. And again, it's another way to go off of Dalvin Cook. People are going to want to say, well, if I take the running back, why should I go with either Cousins or the wide receivers? They're going to be popular, but nowhere near as popular as what we'll likely see out of Cook. Last one, and this one I think is really intriguing because you have exposure to a game that has a terrific total, that has all sorts of shootout potential. O.J. Howard for Tampa Bay against San Francisco at home. Or what about Evan Ingram in a game where the Giants are underdogs on the road at Dallas? Two guys that are going right by each other in fantasy drafts this year, but for DFS week 1, Evan Ingram or O.J. Howard, which one would you rather play?
See, I'm a big fan of Evan Ingram in this one. And you look at Dallas, they have a strong defense, very strong, but they were 19th in DVOA versus the tight end. We've all heard about all the splits without OBJ there and what Evan Ingram has done in 4 career games versus Dallas. He's had 7 or more targets in 3 of those 4. He's averaged 61 yards in those 4 games. And if you look at Dallas just overall, they're 17th percentile versus fantasy points per game allowed to tight end ones, and they have allowed 55 yards receiving to tight end ones. Evan Ingram, I think he's going to get a lot of run in this one. I will not be surprised if we look back at the box score come Monday and Evan Ingram ends up with 12 targets and gets into the end zone twice.
Now, you mentioned those number of targets without Odell Beckham, over 8 per game over the last 2 years when OBJ is not in the lineup. That according to Graham Barfield over at NFL.com. Plenty more coming up and plenty more insight over at thequantedge.com. Derek's got a couple articles coming out. What would we be expecting for you this week?
So I'm actually working on finalizing my wide receiver cornerback matchup article. That will be out later this week, and I'm actually going through my 10 stats that you need to know to win your week. Both of those will be out before Friday, so we can get you prepped and ready for the weekend.
Cannot wait. Don't forget to use the code POWERHOUR to get a major discount over at thequantedge.com. And also head on over to fantasysportsmarkets.com. See that promo code below, TQE. That gets you $5 with no deposit required. You can enter it in our regular contest. You can enter it in our Superflex contest. Over 220 grand is up for grabs just for week 1 alone over at Fantasy Sports Markets. There are no salary caps. You can actually draft and play the guys that you want to play. And be sure to follow us, like, and subscribe below. And we got a fun video coming out on Friday, our top cash and GPP plays for week number 1. It's all here on the Quant Edge Video Series presented by Fantasy Sports Markets.